Take it away. Thank you, Nick.
Where are we going?
Let's take it for a spin.
Ooh, take it for a spin. Good evening. I'm going to turn a piece of maple. I'm going to do a textured surface with the Sorby texturing tool and see what we can do to make it a little bit different. So this is 5/4 soft maple. I just did, I'm working on 26 plates that are being laser engraved this weekend for some sort of dog competition. So I'm going to use a screw chuck to start it with. Center. Everybody knows you shouldn't move the tool rest with the machine running, right?
Yep.
Okay.
None of us do it.
Good. I would certainly never do that. And I'm going to use a 3/8 inch bowl gouge. It's my favorite. And I don't know if you want to zoom in on this. It's sort of a cross between an Ellsworth grind and my own grind. It's a little shorter on the tip than David does. I'll surface it first. This is going to be the bottom of the plate. And I've found that I can do pretty much everything with a single grind. I don't have to have 4 different grinds. Somebody came back from a symposium with Mike Mahoney, and he said, "Where can I get a bottom feeder?" I said, "Do you have a bowl gouge? I'll make you one." "Oh no, I need a bottom feeder." I said, "But it's just a different grind." He said, "No, I want to keep mine the way they are. I need a bottom feeder." I said, "Go online and order one if you really have to have one." But I'm going to use the Talon chuck, and anytime you're using the chuck, whether you're expanding into a recess or clamping down on a tenon, the closer you keep it to fully closed, the more holding power it has. I see people that do a 3-inch recess with 2-inch jaws. There are only 4 points of contact. So I'm going to use a Badan tool to cut the recess. Because it is a Talon, it's just going to be a straight-sided recess. And the thing about the Talon or all the one-way chucks is there are 2 little teeth on the chuck. And you need to get both of those teeth into the recess. Invariably, somebody does one and they get it right on the center of the second tooth, and when you go to clamp it or expand into it, it kicks it out on one side. So it takes about 3/30 seconds or 5/30 seconds or so. I always put 2 rings in the bottoms of my pieces because in the first grade they told me to write between the lines, and it works. So this is roughly 10 inches. So I'm going to make the foot about 5. Anytime you're doing a plate or a platter, 40 to 60% is a good place to start. On a more utilitarian bowl that's more vertical than it is horizontal, a third is fine. But if you do a smaller foot on a plate, if you actually use it, it's going to get tipsy. So does everybody know the safe formula for speed? Does anybody know the safe formula for speed?
The lathe shakes, back it down.
Perfect.
RPM times diameter should fall between 6,000
And the result should be
9,000.
between 6,000 and 9,000. Not 6,000 to 9,000 RPMs, but 6,000 to 9,000. So the Dale Nish instilled it in me a long time ago.
It's all in the catalog.
And I had a student the other day that just couldn't seem to hold the tool against his body. He kept standing way back here like this and leaving little ridges all over the place. And if you simply put the tool against your body, this is a tool vibration dampening unit. This is an essential part of wood turning. You cannot turn without this. You skinny guys have to, you can't turn. You're too skinny. So, but it does help, and keeping your, if you are right-handed, keeping your left hand on the tool rest. And when I'm teaching, particularly plates and bowls, I encourage people to try to get one continuous curve from the foot to the rim. And it doesn't sound like a hard thing to do, but a lot of people have a hard time doing that. They'll either make it concave or they'll make it straight and very conical. And what you'll find aesthetically, it's not very pleasing. And then when you go to pick it up, this convex curve fits your hand a lot better. So keep that in mind. And of course, the OG and all that is nice too, but this is a good way to start. And the more you can do one continuous touch without stopping and starting, you'll have less ridges and you don't have to sand as much. And I haven't found anybody yet that really enjoys sanding. It's my least favorite thing to do. So, and I'm not going to sand this. I hope you don't mind. The foot, I'm going to do a curve from the foot to the, it's going to be radiused instead of a straight-sided pedestal base or a chamfer. You'll find that that's a lot easier to sand. If you do a straight up and down pedestal foot or a chamfered foot, you're going to have to fold up sandpaper and get in there to get it sanded. So this will allow you to power sand it. My finishing cut is with the tool almost vertical, with as little pressure as possible. I have the butt end of the tool against my body. I'm trying to make as little pressure as possible. And I'm looking what I refer to as angel hair. And again, the more you do it in one continuous motion, the smoother the surface is going to be. That'll work. So, any questions? You know there's going to be a test. And because I've done a lot of stuff on a vacuum chuck, I never do anything to the perimeter until after I flip it over. Some years ago, I did 1,350 dinner plates. They get boring. But I got it down to 10 minutes per side. This is the other thing. First and foremost, if you put a little paste wax on the screw, it's a lot easier to get onto the piece, and it's a lot easier to get it off. And if you're using wood that's got any moisture in it, certainly do that. Otherwise, it oxidizes, and it's almost impossible to get it off with some woods. So, but if you put the key in here, put it on the tool rest, that'll give you something to hold on to. Normally, I would sand and finish the back side, the first coat of finish at least, before I take it off. And it becomes very slick at that point. So, any questions? There's no questions.
What do you normally use to finish your platters?
It depends on what they're for. I use the Minwax wipe-on poly or anybody's wipe-on poly a lot. And I will normally sand it to 400 and put the first coat on. Let it dry, sand it again with 400, put a second coat on, and then come back and sand it again with 600 and put another coat on. And then I rub it out with steel wool and paste wax. And that sort of evens the surface and it will take away all the dust particles that land on it. And a lot of times I'll leave it spinning at a very low speed so that it doesn't collect as much dust. But I don't know where it comes from in my shop. I'm sure it's from the painters next door or somebody like that. I don't make any dust.
How long does that Minwax wipe on need to dry?
Usually about 30 or 40 minutes.
And you can sand it that
Yeah.
quick.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of times I'll put it on, it depends on what I'm working on. Right now with the 20 some odd plates, I've got 4 lathes going with them just spinning, and I do one and leave it and go do something else and then come back and do the next one, so.
You said they were getting laser engraved, and then laser engraved over top of your finish?
Yes, and it's best to put a finish on them before you laser engrave. If you don't, it's going to leave like a smoke ring around them, and you should probably sand them lightly and put the finish on them. But I've found that it's best to put a finish on them first, and it really doesn't make any difference what it is. Somebody picked up baby rattle yesterday with a name and birth date on it, and all I put on those is mineral oil and beeswax. But if you just do it on the raw wood, a lot of times it will leave a little sort of shadow around it. So
Nick, how deep is that recess turn?
you weren't paying attention, were you?
Well, I think generally speaking,
It's just a little bit over an eighth. It's deep enough. What chuck do you use?
Nova,
Okay, a Nova has dovetails,
right?
and you can get away with less depth. The Vic Marks are dovetail. This has 2 teeth on it, and both teeth should be inside. So it really depends on what chuck you're using. So Weldon, he gets 1 demerit for not paying attention. Hey, I'm just saying. It'll do. So I always cut from the bottom to the top or from the back to the front. And this is where you got to do a very light cut. If you bring the handle up too high, as the material comes around and the grain is running across now, when it hits right here, every once in a while it'll just take a flap off of it. That's most irritating. And the other thing is, do not put your finger up here and feel it to see if it's round. These fibers will cut you. And I cut from the, and it's not quite round yet, there's still a place there. I cut from the back to the front because typically I have already sanded and put a coat of finish on the back, And if I cut in this direction, all of this tear out's going to be back here, and I'm going to have to resand it. So I try to do things in a progressive mode. But the lighter you cut, the less likely it is to do that. I've got more bevel contacting the surface. And all the bandsaw marks are gone. So that leaves us a nice, crisp, clean surface, and then we'll do a cut across the face of it. And that's a phrase that I got from Del Stubbs. He did the very first video on wood turning probably 35 years ago or more. And that was a phrase he coined: leave your edges crisp but friendly. So it shouldn't be sharp enough to cut you, but if you start sanding the edges because of the direction of the grain, here and here, it'll soften up very quickly, and then on the end grain, it's not going to soften up as much. So if you want to roll the edge, roll it with a tool, not with sandpaper. And even if the material has been surfaced, I do a finish cut across the front and the back, top and bottom, whatever you want to call it. Because typically if it's over 10 inches wide, it's probably going to be cupped slightly, and that will ensure that it's going to sit properly. And this will make the top and the bottom parallel to one another. Whatever you're going to do to the rim, you want to do before you take any of the interior out of the piece. Got a few little ripples here. See if I can get a fine cut on the, at least on the perimeter. And my point of reference for doing any of the face of it is keeping the tool handle level. And that's all about the bevels that I have, and it's not written in stone, but that's the way I do it. So, and I'm going to make 2 marks here, and that's the area I'm going to texture. Anybody have this Sorby texturing tool? Does everybody know to keep the screw on the right-hand side of it? You know what happens when you put the screw on the left-hand side and do it like that? The screw comes out and goes across the floor. Somebody called me today and said, how can I get one of those screws? And I said, well, I would check into it, and I'm going to call Jeff Ferris and see if he has any floating around. But I said, don't you know? He said, I was doing it on the right-hand side. I said, are you sure? Because I've never had it come out on the right-hand side. So this is the Sorby texturing tool. It has just the straight teeth on it. And what I like to do is what I call an orange peel effect. And it's just a very fine texture. There are a lot of things that you can do with this. If you get the entire kit, it comes with the spiraling tools and the little plate to adjust it and all that. But even with this, and I'm just going to make a couple of cuts on the inner portion of this. What I do is just straight up and down like this. You can cock it over just slightly in one or both directions, and it will create a herringbone pattern. And you really need to take either take a coarse brush or a piece of Scotch-Brite to get rid of all the little fibers. It actually works a little better on hard maple than soft, but this is what I had. But you can do that. And I had one of the very first one of these that came into the country. And I don't know, I guess it was at Dalton a year ago. And I went off and left this on my bench. And I went out and borrowed the one from Jeff Ferris, who was there with Sorby. And I came back and I said, apparently I need a new cutter, because yours is cutting a whole lot better than mine was. And what I came to find out is that mine wasn't hardened properly, and it had gotten very dull and just was sort of like little bumps on it. So this actually cuts into the wood. So I'm going to do the texture between the two lines. And it's good to keep this moving back and forth. Otherwise, you get a very distinct pattern, which is what I'm trying to avoid. And we could erase the lines and just leave that, and that becomes a very subtle texture, and it really looks good, especially on hard maple. And my other favorite is European beech, and that's frequently available in 14, 16-inch wide boards at Hardwoods and Peach State, but it will texture nicely, both of them. And so you can leave it like that, or you can take a point tool. Here, can I do that? Thank you, sir. And this is something you can make from drill rod. Sorby and other people make them. It should always be used with one of the flat sides up. If you try to turn it that way, it's going to skate on you. And you can do that, and that makes that stand out a lot more. And you can leave it like that. And that looks good on some pieces. Or you can cut that back. And to cut it back, I'm going to use a 1/4-inch bowl gouge that I have ground to a longer bevel. It's more like a spindle gouge. If you put it on the tool rest and just find that bevel, the other thing is coming in the opposite direction. And centrifugal force tends to take over. And if you don't have it properly anchored and you just barely touch it without the bevel in contact, then it goes flying across and it takes away your texture. And I was talking about this at one of the clubs in Illinois somewhere, and one of the guys says, well, why don't you do it on the other side and turn it on in reverse? I said, I don't know, I hadn't thought about that. It works. So it's a good idea to put the set screw in the chuck when you do this, but we're just going to take a light cut. Famous last words. But this does work. So you've got a bevel that you can ride on. You don't have to worry about it skating. And it cuts very nicely. So don't be afraid to suggest things, because we don't know everything. And I just never had thought about this, but it does do a nice job. Now you've got a surface that is textured and raised above the rest of the rim. And I'm going to come back, should turn it on and forward. Actually, I need to take that down just a little bit. All I'm trying to do here is make these sort of uniform. It's still a little wide here. I'm actually going to undercut this just a little bit. And by undercutting it, and it doesn't have to be extreme, it can just be a tiny little bit. It gives the whole piece a little bit more depth and dimension. But before I do that, to give this a little color, this is cocobolo, which is very resinous, and the resin will transfer to the wood and really make the texture stand out. And there are other woods that will do this. But for a blasé piece of wood, that adds a lot of character to it. So to undercut it, I'm going to go back to the 1/4 inch bowl gouge that has just a little bit of a longer bevel on it. And again, this is where you need to anchor the tool, because if you don't, it's going to skate across the surface. You know how I know that? It's known to happen. And it doesn't have to be severe. It can just be a less than 1/8 of an inch. And it throws a secondary shadow into the piece. What you have to be careful of as you're going up underneath there and cutting around and doing that cove, if you get it too deep, it's hard to blend everything in again. So I started backing off a little bit more. So everything now is done on the rim, and we can go back and just cut the center out. If you go ahead and take the center out, it's probably going to waffle on you a little bit when you're trying to do the rim. So if you leave this in as long as you can. And I don't pay much attention to how deep I drill the hole, but if you set your drill press or put a piece of tape on your drill bit and drill it to whatever you want the finished depth to be, when you get to the bottom of the hole, you know you're there. You don't have to worry about going through. And it's really embarrassing to see the jaws of the chuck when you're doing this. So we try not to do that. No. It's not good for the tools either. Again, just like on the exterior, if you do this in one continuous cut, you're going to have a nicer surface to deal with. And when I'm teaching plates and bowls, I tell all my students, make every cut as if it were your last cut. So lots of light cuts like this, if you try to really hog it out and take out mass quantities, what you're going to end up with, particularly where the face grain and the end grain meet, is you're going to pull the wood out by the fibers, and you're going to have to resort to 60 grit sandpaper, which I don't care for. and it's going to leave little holes in it. So if you do the cuts like this and take lots of light ones, you start to develop muscle memory, and it leaves a much cleaner, smoother surface that doesn't need to spend as much time sanding. So I tell them, take every cut as if it were your last cut. Just don't ever take the last cut. If you think you have one more, just stop. It's that last one. Nobody ever goes through the bottom on the first cut, right? So and it's fun to see Ellsworth take green wood and make 2-inch wide shavings that go all the way to the ceiling. And that's all well and good on green wood, but on dry wood, particularly more open grain woods like oak and ash, you're going to be a lot better off doing a whole series of light cuts like this. There should be a uniform curve that goes from rim to rim. If you want to make a tray, or if it's going to be laser engraved, it needs to be pretty flat. So for the ones that I'm doing right now, I cut a piece and ran it across the joiner, and I check it to ensure that it's going to be flat, and that makes the laser guy's job a lot easier. Just a little rise in the center. Oh, it's still got plenty of room though. So this is my next to the last cut. It's just right across there. And I'm not overly concerned about the lightness or the thinness of the piece. I think in everything pretty much that I do is functional. And if it's functional, it needs to be heavy enough to be used and not afraid to use. So, and so any questions?
If you were going to sand this as a production piece, what would be your steps on that?
I would start with 150, 180, 220, and 320, and then put the first coat of finish on it.
What other woods, you said Coca-Cola was one of them, what are some others?
Most of the tropical woods that have a lot of resin, Bacote, somebody I know was using Paduke, and it's obviously bright orange. I haven't tried any of the ebonies, but I would imagine the Macassar ebony works well.
I just never seen that before, it was cool.
I mean, it's a real easy way, and the ash I actually burn with a torch. And I offered that as an option tonight, and they said to do the texture. But it does make a nice detail, and the burning I usually do on ash. And what I do with it, since we've got a little time here, is I create the rim, and with the rim that I burn, I do a little bit of a crown. Instead of leaving it flat, I have a little dimension to it. And I do the crown first and cut it farther in than it's actually going to go. And then I burn it with a torch, very carefully. You want to get rid of some of the shavings. They go up in a hurry. But
Somebody told you that, right?
yeah, actually, I've been very fortunate. I haven't had any problems with that. But the first thing I do is I just take and lightly scorch it. And because of the grain structure of ash and the contrast between the winter and the summer growth burns very quickly. So you can just fan the flame over it, and it looks almost like zebra wood. But I'm not content with that, so I go back and scorch it thoroughly. And I'll do it about 3 different times, and in between times I take Scotch-Brite like this and I abrade it with the grain, and that cuts away the summer growth more rapidly, so you end up with a texture that's very organic. It doesn't have any linear pattern to it or anything, so this cuts away the softer grain and leaves the harder grain standing above it. And I'll do that usually 3 times. I'll burn it, cut it back, burn it again, cut it back, and go from there. And then for a finish on that, I use it's the Krylon matte finish. And you want to avoid using anything glossy, even semi-gloss, and sometimes even the satin, because when you put it on a table and there's red or blue or something behind it, it's going to pick up that color. So by using a matte spray, it kills all the reflective quality and the black appears much blacker. So that works out well. But the ash and red oak burn better than anything. On maple, you're just as well off taking and using a magic marker on it, because it's not going to create that texture when you abrade it. So. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.